very warm welcome to this edition of India Development Debate. I'm Vikram Oza. Very good evening. And we start with our top story, and this is an ET Now exclusive. It's all about the kind of pressure that oil marketing companies are facing. OMCs like IOC, HPCL and BPCL are facing heavy losses. There has been no increase, remember, in petrol and diesel prices, and this is the case for the last 36 days. Sources are telling us here at ET Now that these oil marketing companies have approached the Petroleum Ministry, and they've said to the ministry that the current model of fuel pricing is just not sustainable anymore. Let's find out what exactly happened at that meeting. My colleague Prakash Priyadarshi has kept us on top of all developments, and he's brought the story to us. Here are the details from Prakash.
See, halting petrol diesel price revision has put more pressure on oil marketing companies once again. We have been informed by our sources that the oil marketing companies have approached Petroleum Ministry for its immediate intervention for hiking of prices of petrol and diesel. As per the sources, OMCs are suffering loss of rupees 25 per litre on diesel and rupees 10 per litre on petrol. As you are aware that the prices of petrol and diesel have not been revised by OMCs for last 36 days because of the informal instruction from the government. But our sources in the ministry have said that, the oil ministry is in favor of allowing OMCs for hiking of, petrol diesel prices. Oil ministry also wants, that relief to be given to the consumer by cutting taxes. Centre should cut, excise duties, and state government should be taken on board for reduction of VAT. It has approached Finance Ministry for its immediate intervention. As of now, excise duties that is being collected by the centre on petrol is rupees 27.9 per litre, and diesel it is rupees 21.8 per litre. And the states are charging VAT as high as 36%. Now it will be interesting to see as to what will be the future action going forward, especially at a time when the centre and the states are blaming each other for current situation.
Prakash bringing us those exclusive details, and now to discuss this very important issue about the oil marketing companies, and this could really have a cascading effect. Let's discuss this in detail with Debasish Mishra. Debasish is a partner at Deloitte India. Also joining us on this discussion tonight is Kirit Parekh. He's an oil and gas expert. And Mohit Soni is here with us. He's Director, Corporate Ratings at Fitch Ratings. First, coming to you, Debasish Mishra. So we understand over here how there is this pressure on international global fuel prices as we see it. The Ukrainian crisis is fueling the kind of fire with the controls that have been put on Russian energy imports. Now, I want to ask you, how severe do you think the situation is for Indian oil marketing companies and the kind of revenue losses that they are currently facing? How real are they that they had to go to the government and said, put a stop on this freeze on prices? No matter what kind of inflationary pressure you're facing, we need a stop on this freeze. How real is the problem? How severe is it? How deep does it run?
Thanks for having me over. The problem is quite critical, and it's coming from three sources. First is obviously because of the geopolitical situation. Crude is hovering around $105 to $110 per barrel. And that's also with the fact that the OECD countries are constantly releasing fuel from their strategic reserves. Otherwise, the way OPEC is falling short in terms of its production, oil would have probably gone somewhere else. But still, oil is at around $105, $110. Second aspect is while the OMCs get money from their consumers in rupee, they have to, most of the purchases they make is in dollar. And the exchange rate has also gone adverse, and the Indian rupee has depreciated in recent times. And the third aspect is the crack spread. The refinery margins have gone through the roof. Although that's not a real cash loss for these companies, but the way the pricing works, they will be making book losses nonetheless. So overall, the scenario is that since in your opening report, you mentioned that after that 10 rupees increase after the elections, they have frozen the prices, and that took care of something like, probably $16 to $17 increase in oil. But this refinery margin and the exchange rate depreciation, that's still uncovered. So overall, we don't have an estimate, and this process of price fixing is still not that transparent for people to actually gauge what kind of losses they are making. But obviously, it's quite apparent that they must be bleeding, and that's the reason why they must have gone to the government and said that it's no longer sustainable.
Well, bleeding they are, but Kirit Parekh, do weigh in on this. What are the options before the government? These are tough times, and tough times, as we all know, they call for tough measures. The truth is, we've deregulated fuel prices in a radical shift of policy and approach here in India. We deregulated petrol in 2010, diesel in 2015, and now the situation is such that this skyrocketing inflation that we are seeing, we are hearing from people, there has been an outcry from them, and all these factors have prompted the government to freeze these prices. So what are the precedents that you've seen to such moves internationally? And secondly, what are the likely repercussions when, a deregulated market is suddenly regulated, so to speak?
Yeah, but one can understand this because the prices have suddenly gone up. Ukraine war is a unexpected blip, you could say, which really pushed up the market price of crude oil. It is now around $107 a barrel, and we are consuming about 110 million tons of diesel. So even small loss on diesel price can mount up to significant amount for the OMCs. However, I think what the government can do is that today, the central government, for example, collects something like 350,000 crores of rupees in taxes and other things from the oil sector. And the state governments collect something like 200,000 crores. So I think that the taxes that they're collecting is a huge amount. And of course, then you have the following dilemma. Either I reduce the taxes and keep the price low, but then I have other expenditure has to be constrained or controlled, or have to raise that resources from a different kind of a taxes. And I believe that it is some via media has to be brought in here. I certainly believe that the central government should reduce its taxes. And some of the states have very high taxes. For example, Andhra Pradesh has a very high VAT or sales tax. And on top of there, some cess on it. So you can see that there are states which are collecting large amount, but the states also, for the revenue, depend on significantly on the revenue they collect from oil sector. On the other hand, I think what worries me is that because this is causing inflation in any case in the country, whether the government passes on the price or not, it's going to create inflation. And it has created. And the Reserve Bank is really raising interest rate. I don't see why raising interest rate would bring oil prices down on the international market, or whether it will have any impact on the domestic inflation rate, which is promoted by oil prices. So there are issues here, I think, which need to be recognized, and certainly, I think maybe a different kind of progressive taxation should be made to collect the taxes, but you have to reduce the sales price of diesel and petrol in some sense, because lots of two-wheeler users are middle-class people, commute fairly long distances from the place of residence to work because they cannot find cheap accommodation in the center of the town.
Absolutely. No, at the consumer level, and I'll come to that in a moment, the impact has been quite severe. But Mohit Soni, of course, we will talk about, taxation at the center and state level, but also OMCs on their part to mitigate the problem and the pressure that they're facing. They've passed on their troubles, so to speak, to petrol pumps by stopping the credit they offer to them. I cite this as an example wherein you're creating more problems of scarcity perhaps, because pumps aren't able to cope without that credit that they get from the oil marketing companies. Even banks aren't willing to come to their rescue. So in effect, it is causing a cascading effect of sorts, and there could be more such examples going ahead where one problem and trying to solve one problem with this freeze that the government has brought in could cause other problems. I'm sure the government is cognizant of it, but trying to plug one hole may lead to other issues. So how do you think that can be resolved?
What one is concerned is that, it's not that we have gone to deregulated prices from that to regulated prices. But once even the need for this regulation goes away, the habit of regulation would continue. And that would be a bad thing to happen.
Vikram, if I may also sort of chip in on that point.
Yes, please do. Please do.
I think it's a situation where the government is actually in a very tight spot, and it's sort of like in between a rock and a hard place because the choices are very, very difficult. I think on the one hand, like Mr. Parekh was mentioning, that cutting excise duties and VAT may lead to additional fiscal pressures for the government because ultimately that government expenditure will need to be funded either through other sources or the government will have to accept a lower GDP growth. While on the other hand, if the OMCs increase retail prices freely, then that may lead to additional inflationary pressures in the economy. CPI is already at 7.8%, and that inflation will again hurt GDP growth. While doing nothing is also not an option for the government because ultimately the OMCs continue to make losses, which is also something they can't allow for a long period because any disruption in their operations may present risks to India's energy security because ultimately these companies import a large chunk of India's daily oil needs, convert it into refined products, and make these fuels available in the economy, not to mention the investment required for longer-term energy security. So I think the approach of the government will really need to be a combination of all these points where they will have to balance the sovereign's fiscal pressures, the economy's inflationary pressures, and the OMC's financial health, and try to find out some sort of a middle ground and a combination of these three approaches where all these considerations get addressed.
Well, this is a tough balancing act. Debasish Mishra, fuel affects almost every industry vertical. Input costs also have been rising all around. The kind of corporate earnings that are being reported, they're all mindful. They're very wary about what the future holds as of now. Inflation, like all you gentlemen are pointing out, a real big worry. The RBI has already acted out of turn and hiked rates. The effectiveness of that move is clearly in question. What else can we expect the government to do at this stage? Because like you're talking about, there could be a combination of measures. And as far as the rupee is concerned, clearly they don't want too much of pressure building up on the Indian rupee either. So whatever policy moves do kick in, they have to be mindful on so many different fronts. And this, even as the world is trying to cope with possibly a recession. So in terms of the tools before the government, are they limited? And if at all they're limited, then what do you have? What is the room that they have to play with? Debasish.
Yeah, so I think this is a global kind of a situation where all the commodity prices are have run away, including a lot of food grains throughout the world. Heavy price increase has happened, and it's not only crude. In fact, crude is probably one of the lowest increase. If you look at natural gas, LNG, it's gone through the roof. Coal, everything has gone through so the energy alternate options are also very limited. And coming back to government's approach to this, I think there has to be, I think kind of a political stalemate, as Dr. Parekh was mentioning. I think the VAT which the states are charging and the excise duty which the government of India charges, they are at a level where they can afford to bring it down a bit to give that headroom to the OMCs with the same amount of money paid by the consumer. They will probably cover their cost. The other thing is obviously postponing the problem by coming out with oil bonds. But given the stance that this government has taken about the past oil bonds, they will probably not have that because they have been critical of the oil bonds in the past, and they have been with they have mentioned that consumers are still paying back for the past oil bonds. But I don't see any other solution because obviously, given where the high street prices are and retail inflation, too much increase over this is not going to work out, and it's going to adversely affect consumption in every segment. You have seen in every, including FMCG, cement, every segment you see there is input cost pressure, and that's going to hurt margins, and ultimately it is going to destroy demand. So one has to be cognizant of that situation. And as Mohit mentioned, it's a fine balance between the fiscal math and the inflation, and obviously what the OMC's financial health is. So these are the three factors which have to be kept in mind, and while you are doing a balancing act.
One thing I think we can do is really, commodity prices have gone up, wheat prices have shot up on the international market, and we can export a lot more wheat than before. So take full advantage of it. And on the PDS, substitute a lot of rice for wheat, because years ago we substituted a lot of rice for wheat for rice. Now maybe it is time to bring some rice back into the PDS, and people would buy that. I'm sure that that would be acceptable, and that way you can at least protect the lower rungs of the income classes, so that they
and that's really
are slightly this, and we can get some extra foreign exchange by doing this, because the strain on foreign exchange of the rising oil prices and falling rupee is quite significant.
Yes, it is. In fact, that is going to be a necessitating factor in terms of determining the kind of approach, the kind of model that you create to mitigate the kind of problems that we are facing, the inflationary issues now with rising fuel prices, the fuel freeze, as we call it, on the prices. Perhaps the benefits of that may be limited because it could be causing other issues, as we've discussed. But the depreciating Indian rupee is going to be top of mind as well, because we have to understand getting crude in the international market is that much more expensive for Indian OMCs with a rupee that has fallen considerably against the greenback. So we'll keep tracking all that happens as far as the government is concerned. The moves that the RBI makes is always, of course, going to be looked at with a scanner. But thank you, gentlemen, for joining us with your perspective on this, on the India development debate. Thanks indeed for telling us exactly what the possible models could be to tackle this humongous problem that we are facing, and we are not alone in this. Thanks indeed.
I feel that you should really think about not just the immediate future, but also the consequences 3 or 4 quarters down the line. And sometimes having a very high fiscal deficit and how you finance it can have a very adverse impact on your growth and inflation.
Gentlemen, I have to thank you for joining us on this edition of India Development Debate.